Brothers and sisters, we are living in dangerous times. Times when the truth is punished, when a man who dares to speak with honesty is marked as an enemy. Times when telling the people to stand up, to open their eyes, to break the chains of ignorance is treated like a crime. I have been accused of many things. They say I am too harsh, too blunt, too uncompromising. But let me tell you this. It is not hate to tell the truth. It is not extremism to defend yourself. It is not violence to refuse to be trampled underfoot any longer. Truth is not hate, and self-defense is not extremism. Too often, when a man stands up to tell the truth about the conditions of his people, when he dares to expose the injustice that has been swept under the rug, they brand him with a label. They say he is bitter. They say he is hateful. They say he is extreme. But ask yourself, is it hate to describe reality as it is? Is it hate to call the chains around your neck what they are? Is it hate to tell a man who has been sleeping to wake up? The real hate lies not in the voice that cries out, but in the hand that strikes down, not in the lips that speak, but in the system that crushes. When you open your eyes and describe the fire burning in front of you, are you guilty of arson? No. You are only guilty of refusing to be blind. When you call a thief, do you commit robbery? No. You are only guilty of refusing to be fooled. So why is it that when we name the injustice, when we call the oppressor by his name, when we demand that our humanity be recognized, we are called haters? It is because truth makes the guilty tremble. It is because truth unmasks the disguise that power wears. It is because truth is the one weapon that cannot be destroyed. And so they try to destroy the one who wields it. Self-defense is not extremism. If a man walks into your home, threatens your family, raises his hand to strike you, and you defend yourself, no jury of honest men would call you extreme. They would call you human. They would call you sane. They would call you justified. But when it comes to the oppressed rising up against centuries of violence, suddenly the standards change. Suddenly the right to defend ourselves is rebranded as dangerous. Suddenly the instinct to protect our lives is painted as fanaticism. This is the hypocrisy of a world that values its own safety but questions ours. If the oppressor has the right to defend his interests with armies, with police, with laws, with prisons, then surely the oppressed have the right to defend their lives with whatever strength they possess. Yet the moment we say we will no longer turn the other cheek, they clutch their pearls and cry out that we are violent. But it is not violence to refuse to be beaten. It is not extremism to protect your children. It is not hatred to demand dignity. It is survival. And survival is the most natural law there is. They call it hate when you tell the truth because they profit from lies. They call it extremism when you defend yourself because they depend on your weakness. They need you to be silent so that they can continue their violence unchecked. They need you to be passive so that they can continue their plunder undisturbed. They need you to be forgiving so that they never have to repent. But when you strip away those lies, when you refuse to play their game, you stand as a free human being. And that is what they fear most. Truth is dangerous to those who live by deceit. That is why newspapers twist words, why leaders condemn voices of resistance, why governments spy on their own citizens. It is not because the truth is hateful. It is because it is powerful. When a people begin to see clearly, they cannot be ruled in the same way. When they recognize the wolf under the sheep's clothing, they cannot be devoured so easily. And when they see that the chains around their wrists were never meant to be permanent, they begin to loosen them. That is the revolution of the mind. And it begins with speaking the truth, even when the world calls it hate. The charge of extremism is nothing but a trick. It is a word used to scare the masses into obedience. They say, be moderate, be patient, be polite. But moderation in the face of injustice is not virtue, it is complicity. Patience in the face of brutality is not wisdom, it is surrender. Politeness in the face of murder is not civility, it is suicide. So they throw the word extremist at those who refuse to bow, hoping to shame them back into silence. But if defending your life, your family, your dignity, your future, if that is extremism, then what is moderation? Moderation is watching your children starve while you politely ask for bread. Moderation is letting your sister be beaten while you quietly whisper for mercy. Moderation is letting generations live and die in chains while you write petitions for freedom. That is not moderation. That is cowardice dressed up as reason. The world respects strength. The world does not give to the weak what it withholds from the strong. And when you show the world that you will no longer be a victim, no longer a passive participant in your own destruction, the world will call you names, it will call you dangerous, it will call you hateful. But those words are only proof that you have touched the nerve of power. They are only proof that your voice has broken through the wall of silence. They are only proof that you are no longer invisible. And make no mistake, when the oppressed begin to defend themselves, the balance of power begins to shift. Those who built their empires on our submission know this. That is why they fight so hard to paint us as extremists. Because if the masses begin to believe that self-defense is a right, if the people begin to see that truth is not hate but liberation, then their entire system begins to crumble. Lies can only stand so long before the weight of truth brings them down. So when they say truth is hate, remember that it is only hate to those who hate the truth. And when they say self-defense is extremism, remember that it is only extremism to those who live off your defenselessness. The truth liberates, and the defense of life affirms life. Without both, there is no freedom. The system was built on us, not for us. Every brick in its foundation, every stone in its walls, every drop of mortar that holds it together was paid for by the sweat of our labor and the blood of our ancestors. When they laid down the roads, when they raised up the cities, when they cultivated the fields, it was not with their own hands, it was with ours. When they filled their banks, when they built their schools, when they crowned themselves with wealth and power, it was not from their own genius. It was from our toil, from our backs bent under their burdens, from our lives stripped of dignity so they could live in comfort. And yet, after centuries of this, they dare to say the system is fair. They dare to say the system works. They dare to say the system belongs to all. But we know the truth. The system was never designed to serve us, only to use us. From the very beginning, laws were written not to protect us, but to protect them from us. Constitution spoke of liberty with hands stained in slavery. Declarations proclaimed equality with chains still clinking in the fields. Courts swore justice with blindfolds that saw everything except our humanity. This is the truth of the system. It was crafted like a machine, precise and deliberate, to keep us at the bottom while pretending to uphold ideals for all. And when we demanded those ideals for ourselves, they told us to wait. They told us progress was slow. They told us justice takes time. But how long is time when centuries have passed? How long is patience when generations are buried in poverty, in prisons, in silence? The truth is that the system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed. They built it on us, not for us, and that is why every promise they make rings hollow. They say education is the key, yet the schools in our neighborhoods crumble while there's our palaces of learning. They say work hard and you will succeed, yet we work harder than anyone and still remain on the bottom rung. They say justice is blind, yet the prisons overflow with our bodies while there's walk free with crimes 10 times greater. They say opportunity is equal, yet the doors swing open for them and slam shut for us. This is not an accident. This is not misfortune. This is design. A design that feeds off our labor but starves our lives. The system has always needed us. It needed us when we were in chains, breaking the soil that fed their wealth. It needed us when factories rose, turning us into machines for their profit. It needs us now in the lowest paid jobs, in the hardest conditions, in the places they will not go but cannot live without. And when we are no longer needed, when machines can take our place, when new workers can be brought in cheaper, then we are discarded. Then we are criminalized. Then we are told we are worthless. But a system that is built on our backs cannot survive without us, and that is its weakness. They depend on the very people they despise. Yet still they pretend. They speak of democracy while silencing our voices. They speak of freedom while policing our movements. They speak of equality while hoarding the riches we created. Every speech from their podiums, every policy from their chambers, every promise from their mouths is coated in hypocrisy. They do not build systems for us. They build systems to contain us, to pacify us, to distract us, to divide us. They give us crumbs and call it progress. They give us tokens and call it representation. They give us symbols and call it change. And too often, they hope we mistake those shadows for substance. The system is clever. It knows brute force cannot last forever, so it reinvents itself. It trades the whip for the law, the chains for the wage, the plantation for the prison. It puts on a new mask with every generation, but underneath it is the same face. A face that feeds on our exploitation and fears our awakening. A face that smiles in public but schemes in private. A face that survives only because too many of us are convinced it has changed. But it has not changed, it has only adapted. What was built on us cannot be transformed into something that serves us without tearing it down to its roots. Look around and see the evidence. Whole neighborhoods gutted by policies that enrich the few. Families broken apart by courts and cages. Children raised to believe they are less than what they are. Workers giving their lives to jobs that pay barely enough to live. Elders discarded after a lifetime of service. All while towers of wealth rise higher. All while power grows more concentrated. All while those at the top congratulate themselves for their success. But their success is built on our sacrifice, and the system is the mechanism that keeps that sacrifice flowing. Do not be fooled when they say the system can be fixed with minor adjustments. Do not be fooled when they say reforms will make it fair. Reforms are the patches on a fabric that was woven to bind us. A stitch here, a stitch there, but the design remains the same. They will give just enough to quiet the anger, just enough to buy time, just enough to maintain control. And then they will take it back when the storm passes. Because the system cannot be reshaped into something it was never meant to be. It was not built for us. And until we build something new, it will never serve us. We must recognize that truth. No matter how bitter it tastes, We must see through the lies of fairness and equality when the evidence around us proves otherwise. We must understand that the wealth of nations was stolen from the sweat of the poor. We must see that the power of the few exists only because the many are kept powerless. Once that truth is clear, once it settles in the mind and the heart, there can be no more illusions. There can be no more waiting. There can be no more belief that the system that rose on our backs will one day turn around to lift us up. Oppression anywhere is oppression everywhere. The chains that bind one people are links in the same chain that threatens another. The hand that strikes down in one land is the same hand that prepares to strike in another. When you see injustice carried out on your neighbor and turn away, you are not escaping it. You are only postponing the day it comes for you. Those who build their power on the suffering of one people never stop with one people. Greed has no borders, tyranny has no nationality, exploitation has no language. What they practice abroad, they will soon practice at home. What they test on the weak, they will one day unleash on the strong. History shows this clearly. Empires that marched across continents, enslaving nations, stripping lands bare, were the same empires that turned on their own poor when the colonies grew restless. The weapons of war forged to control foreign lands were later turned inward to silence dissent at home. The techniques of domination never remain confined. Once they are perfected, they are spread. This is why no people can afford to say, "That is not my struggle," because your silence today plants the seeds of your suffering tomorrow. When a people in Africa are robbed of their resources, it is not only their tragedy. The wealth stolen there fuels the system that keeps you poor here. When farmers in Asia are underpaid for their labor, it is not only their loss. Their exploitation sets the standard that devalues your work too. When voices in Latin America are crushed by dictatorships, it is not only their silence. It is the same silence that governments wish to impose on you when you rise up. Oppression is global, and its victims are connected, whether they realize it or not. This is why the powerful always try to divide the oppressed. They tell one group that another is their enemy. They draw lines of race, of religion, of nation, of class, and tell us to defend those lines. But the lines are illusions, they are distractions. The poor in one country are not the enemies of the poor in another. The worker in one factory is not the rival of the worker in another. The child starving in one land is not less valuable than the child starving in another. The true enemy is the hand that profits from the hunger of both. The true enemy is the system that demands division so that it can continue its plunder. Oppression anywhere is oppression everywhere because it creates a world where domination is normal, where cruelty is accepted, where silence becomes habit. If you accept the suffering of one group as natural, you weaken your ability to resist when the same suffering comes to you. If you can justify the chains on one people, you are preparing your own wrists for shackles. If you excuse the bombing of one village, you are laying the ground for the bombing of your own. Injustice tolerated anywhere becomes a precedent, and those who practice it count on your indifference to sharpen their knives for the next victim. We cannot think in narrow terms. We cannot believe that our struggle is isolated, that it begins and ends at the border of a neighborhood or a nation or a continent. The same forces that steal land in one place steal wages in another. The same corporations that exploit labor overseas lobby to strip rights at home. The same governments that preach freedom while supporting dictators abroad prepare laws to restrict your freedom here. To see these connections is not to weaken your struggle. It is to strengthen it. For when the oppressed recognize their shared condition, their combined strength becomes unstoppable. Solidarity is not charity. It is not pity. It is recognition of self-interest. When you defend the rights of the oppressed elsewhere, you are defending your own rights as well. When you speak against the bombing of children far away, you are protecting your own children from a world where bombs are normalized. When you stand with workers across the sea, you are raising the value of your own labor. Solidarity is survival, because oppression knows no boundaries, and neither should resistance. The oppressors understand this better than many of the oppressed. That is why they coordinate across nations. That is why they share weapons, share intelligence, share strategies. They know that the survival of their power depends on global cooperation. And yet too often the oppressed are kept divided, each fighting in isolation, each convinced their struggle is unique. But imagine what would happen if those walls were broken down. Imagine if the oppressed of every land saw themselves as one people, not separated by false borders but united by shared struggle. The empires of the world could not withstand such unity. Oppression anywhere is oppression everywhere because freedom itself is indivisible. You cannot cage one people and claim another is free. You cannot silence one voice and claim another can speak. You cannot exploit one group and claim another has dignity. Freedom is whole, and so long as one part of humanity is denied it, the rest remains compromised. To fight for freedom is to fight for all of it, for every life in every land. Anything less is a concession to the logic of oppression itself. When you look at the world, do not see scattered struggles, isolated uprisings, distant tragedies. See the pattern that connects them. See the thread of exploitation that runs through them. See the common enemy that hides behind different masks. And once you see it, understand that you cannot afford to turn your back on anyone's suffering, because that suffering is linked to your own. If you want to be free, you must want freedom for all. If you want dignity, you must demand dignity for all. If you want justice, you must insist on justice for all. Only then can oppression lose its grip, because it depends on division, it depends on apathy, it depends on the illusion that your neighbor's chains are not connected to yours. Silence is death. Freedom must be taken, not given. When you see injustice and hold your tongue, you give life to the very system that crushes you. When you watch oppression unfold and say nothing, you are not neutral. You are an accomplice. The oppressor thrives on silence, because silence is the oxygen that keeps his fire burning. Every moment you remain quiet, every time you swallow your truth, every time you let fear paralyze you, you are digging a grave for yourself and for your people. Silence does not shield you, it buries you. It does not preserve peace, it preserves oppression. It does not prevent violence, it guarantees it. There is a lie told to the oppressed that silence is wisdom, that if you wait long enough, if you keep calm, if you obey the rules, freedom will one day arrive like a gift. That lie has been passed down for generations, and it has killed more people than bullets. Freedom is never delivered by the hand of the oppressor. Freedom is never written into law by those who profit from your chains. Freedom is never granted out of pity or out of kindness. Freedom is seized by those who refuse to remain silent. The history of every people who have risen shows the same truth. No rights were ever given freely. They were wrestled from the grip of power by those who dared to speak, dared to act, dared to resist. Silence is death, because it teaches the oppressor that his violence has no cost. When you do not speak, he believes he can strike again. When you do not resist, he believes he can deepen your chains. When you do not fight, he believes you have accepted your place. And once he believes that, he will never stop. He will push further, take more, strip away everything until you are left with nothing but the memory of what you once hoped for. But when you break silence, when you say no, when you stand in defiance, you interrupt that cycle. You make him understand that there is a cost to his violence. You show him that every step he takes against you will be met with resistance, that his power is not absolute, that his control is not complete. Freedom must be taken, not given, because those who hold power never surrender it willingly. Power protects itself. It wraps itself in laws, in institutions, in traditions, in propaganda, in weapons. It tells you that you are too weak to challenge it, that you are too ignorant to question it, that you are too divided to defeat it. And as long as you remain silent, that lie holds true. But when you decide to take freedom, you shatter that illusion. You expose the truth that power rests not in the hands of the few, but in the hands of the many who have been convinced to stay quiet. The silence of the oppressed is the greatest weapon of the oppressor. It is more effective than the police, more effective than the courts, more effective than the military. Because silence is consent dressed as patience. Silence is obedience disguised as peace. Silence is submission wearing the mask of maturity. But freedom is never born from silence. Freedom is born from noise, from the cry of the people, from the sound of marching feet, from the roar of voices that refuse to be ignored. The louder the oppressed speak, the weaker the oppressor becomes. The more the oppressed act, the more fragile his power appears. And once the oppressed take what is theirs, no force on earth can take it back. To take freedom requires courage. It requires the willingness to risk something, because every oppressor makes you believe that the price of resistance is too high. They will threaten you with prison, with death, with poverty, with exile. They will make you fear the consequences of action more than the suffering of inaction. But what they will never tell you is that silence carries its own price. Silence robs you of dignity. Silence robs you of your humanity. Silence robs you of your very life. Better to die fighting for freedom than to live forever enslaved by silence. Look at the world around you. Every people who ever gained even a measure of freedom did so by breaking silence and by taking what was theirs. The workers who demanded fair wages did not wait for the factory owner to wake up one morning with compassion. They went on strike. They risked their livelihoods. They took freedom. The nations who shook off colonial rule did not wait for the colonizer to decide to leave. They rose up, they fought, they bled, they took freedom. Women who demanded their rights that did not beg politely until men granted them dignity. They marched, they shouted, they defied, they took freedom. The story repeats again and again. Silence preserves chains, resistance breaks them. The tragedy is that so many still believe freedom will be handed down like a gift. They wait for elections, for speeches, for promises, for laws, as if justice can be passed like charity. But those who control the system only make concessions when they are forced to. They give just enough to calm the storm, to weaken the resistance, to delay the uprising. And then they take it back when the people fall silent again. That is why freedom taken is real, but freedom given is temporary. What you seize with your own hands belongs to you. What is handed to you out of pity can be taken away the moment you grow too bold. Silence is death because it kills the spirit before the body. It makes you accept the unacceptable. It makes you endure the unbearable. It makes you live a life where you are breathing but not alive, existing but not free, surviving but not living. It creates generations that learn to lower their heads, to bite their tongues, to shrink their dreams. It produces a people who inherit chains instead of legacies. And once a people grow accustomed to silence, they forget what it means to be free. That is the most dangerous death of all, the death of memory, the death of vision, the death of hope. Freedom must be taken, not given, because it is not the nature of power to release its grip willingly. It is not the nature of privilege to dismantle itself. It is not the nature of tyranny to loosen its chains. Freedom is born only when those in chains refuse to remain silent, when they demand with their voices, their bodies, their actions that they will no longer be denied. The act of taking freedom is the act of declaring life, of declaring dignity, of declaring humanity in the face of a system that denies it. Only through resistance, only through action, only through the refusal to stay silent does freedom ever come into being.